Hi, and welcome to a new tutorial from Airbush One. I'm Lonnie Bush. Today we're going to assemble these printer heads and time them to the Candy Conveyor, and then add some wires. And I'm going to start off with the file that is available on my website to download, but you are free to follow along. If you did the earlier Conveyor Candy tutorial, you can follow along with your file. Some of the numerical values may change between this file and your file, but as long as you follow the math, everything should work out fine. So let's start by going up and getting two nulls. Oops, I didn't want that cube. One, and we'll just make a copy. Okay. For now, let's just put this null under the other one. And then I want to get a cone. And we're going to make this cone top radius 150, bottom radius 150, and then the height 640. And we can leave everything else the same right now. And let's go into the front view. And what we want to do is let's put this cone under the second null. And let's drag this over, I don't know, to about here. And we're going to go ahead and raise it up. Actually, let's bring it over to this one. Okay. And get that kind of centered on there. So let's get another cube, or let's get a cube. Let's pull it over here for now. And I want to make the size on X, let's say make it 3, and then on Y, so make it about 500, and then on Z, let's make it 400. Okay, and then let's pull a copy of that. All right, and open up your bottom cloner here, and let's drag this cube, one of these, down to the very last sphere, and stick it in there, and then in the coordinates manager, just zero everything by right-clicking these two little arrows. Now, if we come in close, you can see that that cube looks like a line on all of these clones. All right, so for right now, let's go ahead and, well, let's do the other one. All right, let's take this cube, drag it into the cone, and do the same. Right-click on these coordinates to zero that out. And I'm just going to pull that cube down so it intersects a little bit into the clone. So now we've got kind of a guide. And let's go ahead and put a display tag on this. Where are we here? Display. And we're going to use garage shading, and yeah, that's fine. Alright, and if we click away, you can see it's gray. So let's just create a quick color and drop it on there, and that looks a little better. And then if we go down here and put the same display tag, choose garage shading. Now they're showing up blue just like those clones. Well, it's the end clone. So now we've got some kind of gauge, and I think I'm just going to change this to an orange. So we can see it a little. Okay, and I'm going to move this one down. We should be able to move it down in Y. And okay. So that will give us a visual aid for lining these up. And I'm just going to start out right there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So what we want to do now is let's set our timeline to 30 frames. And that's what we're going to base this off of. And as we go along, I think this is all going to make more sense. So at our current, let's see what our current, nope, no, it's in this one. Our current rate, what we're trying to do is we need to time the piston action of this cone, which we haven't set up yet for a reason, because I want to be able to line these up. We need to time it to this rate, okay? Now, it can be timed either way. You can time it, the rate determines the frame count, which is going to make more sense in a few minutes, or you can do it frame to rate. And it works okay rate to frame, but it works, I think, better frame to rate. And I think the reason is because the frames, there's nothing in between frame 2 and frame 3 or frame 3 and frame 4. There's no intermediate. So it's a pretty exact amount. But with the rate, there's, there's at least 4 to 5 decimal places behind this number. So there's a lot of room for intermediate steps. Anyway, we're going to set it up by using the frame rate and a frame count. But like I said, it'll make more sense in a minute. So what we are trying to determine is if we pull this timeline along, you'll see that in 30 frames, okay, now I realize that's actually 31, okay, but that will make sense in a minute too. This is actually 30 frames, but what we need is 30 frames on the timeline. So if we take this and put that down to 2, so we know it's got to be between 2 and 3. Okay, so 2.9 is too much, and that's 2.85. Oop, oh, I messed that up. 2.85. 2.86 maybe. And this takes a little playing around with, but luckily, once we get this, I'm going to put in 5.5. And I'm pretty happy with that, okay? But let's test it out and let's add 300 frames. Oh, wait a minute. Let's just back this up and make sure. Okay, so it's moving one whole space in 30 frames, and that's what we're trying to determine. Okay, and so let's just test it out a little bit by adding 300 to it. Let's make a total of 300. So that's our start position. Go to our end position, and you can see it's a little off. And so if we're going to take this to say 900 frames, then you can see it's off by that much. Okay, and we do want to fix that. Now, the chances of you ever doing 900 frames of this conveyor is pretty remote, but it's nice to have it set up more correctly. So let's make this try that 6, and yeah, so that looks like that's going to work. Okay, so I've got 2.857, and if I take it back to 0, you saw that little bit of movement, but over 900 frames, I can live with that. And so if we zoom out, well, you can't tell anything, right? That okay. So I'm real good with that, and we can adjust it later, but that's looking good to me. So let's set up our up and down movement in this with this null. Actually, let's rename that movement Y. Okay, and then let's go up and get another null, and we're going to name this speed control. Okay. Oh. Okay, so on the speed control, right click and come down and get an Xpresso tag. And so what we want is we want our timeline, okay, the animation here to control the movement in Y here, all right? So first we need Xpresso General, come down and get a time node, pull that out a little bit, come down and get frame. And we're going to use a calculate range mapper. All right, and you can go ahead and hook the frame to the range mapper. And what we need to do is determine, let's pull this movement Y null in here, and of course grab position Y. And what we need to do is determine how much we want that to move up. Okay, so zoom out a little bit and go to the coordinates manager and just start pulling this up. We can kind of eyeball that. 300 look pretty good around there. So let's go ahead back into our range mapper. We'll set this output upper at 300. And what we're going to set this for is the frames. That's what we're inputting is frames. And right now we're going to set the 30 frames per second, which is the frame rate of this project. Now once we get this all set up, some of you may be using 24 frames per second, 25. If you're using the file, if you downloaded the file I provided, then it's already set at 30. If you're not, you might want to change for now. Once we get this set up, you can change it to 25, 24, and the speed control and all that will still work fine. But for setting it up, you might want to do that. Okay, so let's set our timeline back to 30. And we need to hook this up. All right, and that should drop that down. So let's see how this works. So as we start going through the frames, you see our cylinder rising, our cone actually. When it gets to 29, it's going to be at its peak. Okay, now you may wonder why it's not at 300. I'm not exactly sure either, and it may be that it hits 300. Oh, haha. Okay, so we forgot the most important part. Let's go back into our range mapper and let's click on Modulo. And Modulo is going to set up a cycle, basically. So every 30 frames, it's going to cycle our cone, our null, movement Y null and cone between 0 and 300. Okay, so let's see how that works. So here now we're at 29, but when we go to 30 now, it drops it back down. And it's going to do that every 30 frames. Okay, so if we set this to 90 and pull that out and start pulling this through, you can see it's going to drop it every 30 frames. And this works whether you've set this number to 15 or whatever number you want. Now we're going to set up a range between 15 and 30. So basically you'd have there'll be like 15 speeds to this, and the speed of this going up and down or the cycle is also going to control the rate, okay, of our clones, so that whatever frame rate you set in our speed control is going to change the rate accordingly. All right, so there's one thing we want to do. Right now, you can see this thing's dropping like a hammer, okay? And we want something a little more, maybe not quite so harsh. So if we go in here and click in our spline, and let's just click in a linear for now, okay? And if you control click, you can put in a new point. And we're going to drop this down, and let's just select all these. And right click and come up to point types and just ease. And oops, and we just want to grab this top one. Okay. And so right now, this is going to define the movement, okay, how this cycle between 0 and 300 is interpolated, okay? And so, and this is going to interpolate it over 30 frames. So let's see what happens. So we raise it up, and you see it's a little softer coming down. That's because before it was basically like this, just a straight line and a straight drop. But now we can control. So if you want to pull this over here, in other words, you want it to drop a little faster, raises up and drops a little faster, you can do that. You can even control how long it stays at the bottom. If we pull that a little bit and straighten that a little bit, you'll get a little different movement. But it's always going to be back in that same spot when it hits 30 frames. So let's see what happens if we change this change this to 15. Now, it's not going to line up with our clones down here, but you're going to see the same action, except now it's going to happen faster. So at 15 frames now, it's coming down and hitting. So every 15 frames, 45, and then again it's 60. So whatever you change this to, that's the cycle you're setting. So if we set this to, oops, say 7, oops, 7, okay, then every 7 frames, and you can see how fast that's going to be. Okay, so let's change this back to 30. Hope you get the idea. We need to set up our speed control, so make sure just the null is selected and not the tag also. And come down in the Attributes Manager into User Data and just add User Data. And go ahead and add a group, and we're going to call this group Speed Control. And then let's drag our data into it. And then set this number to real. And let's put in 15 for the minimum, or actually let's put 10. Really fast, but put 10 and then 30 for the max. And go ahead and make those the minimum and maximum so you can't go beyond those. I mean, you can do that if you want or leave it. It should work either way. And then we'll just call this speed in frames or something. I don't know. Close enough. Okay. So now I do want to color these because we're going to get a few nodes in here, and it's not going to be overly complicated or anything. But let's see here. Okay. All right. So it took a while. I'm going to zero that back out. It took a while to figure out this math, and I will kind of go through it, what works. So let's just start. All these calculations are going to be based off the frame rate of the project. So if you change your frame rate, then everything will still work. So let's grab frames per second, and just so we can see what's going on, it's going to get a result node. And if I attach that, you're going to see that it is reading 30. Okay? And then the other thing we need is our speed control that we just set up. Okay? And let's go down, click, and come down to speed control, speed in frames. Make sure, click on that, make sure this is set to 30 for now. All right, and let's get a calculate math. And we're going to take our frames per second. We're going to set this to divide. And we're going to divide by the speed in frames, which right now is 30. So let's just pull a result. Just control drag that. And let's see what we've got. Okay, I do want to come here to animation refresh under calculate so that this calculates immediately. So that is correct, 1. And if we took this to 15, see that's 2. Take it to 10, should be 3. And then if you take this to 20, now you start getting into these not quite whole numbers anymore. And then if we take this to 25, 1.2, and let's take this to 27. And now you really get a crazy number, 1.111. And let's put that back to 30 for now. So the number we output here is the number that we want to multiply by our rate. So let's calculate another math node. Go ahead and hook this top number in and set this to multiply. Then because this is our constant, okay, 2.857, I'm just going to copy that and go back into my math node, and this will be our second input. So that doesn't change, that stays constant. So now we're outputting a pretty large number, Okay, and we need to turn it back into a percent. And as you can see, there is no percent here. So we're going to get another math node, Xpresso calculate math. We're going to set that to divide, because we need to divide this number now by 100, which will turn it back into a percent. Let's get a result node here. Okay, 0.029. And then if we take our cloner, this is the one with the rate control, okay, and drag it in. And then you can come over and just click on rate and drag it right into this box. And if we hook this up, that number should not change right now. We drag this down. Everything's still working. Okay. So let's take our speed control and set it to 15. All right. Okay. So we've got a problem. It's not changing the rate. Oh, but it did change the rate. Ah, I know what I did wrong. Okay, so if you go back into our range mapper, you see that the speed control is set to 15. But in the range mapper, we're still modulating at 30. So what we need to do is let's drag the input upper into, it's not going to let me do it, so let's just do it this way, input upper. And what we want to do is we want to take our speed control and drag that to input upper. Now, of course, you can't check it now, unfortunately. It won't show you the number, but we know that this number is 15. Okay, so now let's back it up. And now we see that it's working. Now it looks like it might be a little off, but if you stop it, let's say stop it at 15, stop it at 30, stop it at 45, you see it's lining up perfect, 60. And go ahead and put 900 frames and go to the end, and you can see it's still lining up perfectly. Okay? And so now with this set up this way, you should be able to go into your project. Well, let's just try it real quick. Let's go into your project. First, you go into Shift V, so the viewport setting here, and we want to go into, no, that's not right, Command D, I'm sorry. Change the frame rate to 25. Okay, some of you might be using 25 or even 24. And then go into the render settings and also set the frame rate at 25. All right. And let's see, what is our speed control is 15. Okay. So if it should still be modulating at 15, it is. Oop, 30. Now let's go back to 150. 45. And so everything still works. So because of the way we've got this hooked up, it's reading the frame rate of the project. So whatever, you can put your speed at whatever up here, and it will stay aligned with our clones. So I'm going to go back in and change my frame rate back to 30. And go back into render settings, set back to 30. And that should do it for the timing part. So let's go into part 2 and start building this printer head assembly, and now that we've got it timed, and then add some wires. All right, see you in the next part.